Guys, welcome back to another video, and today what we're going to be talking about is an atheist objection to the biblical canon and monotheism in Judaism and the Bible. So today, the objection from an atheist is indeed that ancient Israel was polytheistic. Now personally, I object to this, but we're going to get into that throughout the video. First, for starters, there's two main arguments to this. There's the biblical and historical argument in favor of the atheist polytheism in ancient Israel. Now, I personally think that both arguments are wrong. Let me explain why. So, for starters, we'll start with the historical argument, as that's the main one that many propagate on websites such as Quora or Reddit. The main argument is that in ancient Israel, they find that many Israelites, or many people who were of the Levant, West Semitic or Asiatic otherwise, were indeed worshippers of ancient polytheistic deities, such as Asherah, Baal, El, and others. But in my personal opinion, this doesn't disprove the Bible whatsoever. In fact, if anything, it would give more evidence to the Bible. The Bible very clearly states that in early Israel, many Israelites had believed in many different gods as a way of disobeying. This is why the major and minor prophets came around, such as Elijah, who was not a major or minor prophet. However, he spoke out during a time in which ancient Israel was going through this. Many of them had believed in polytheistic gods as a rebellion towards God. So if anything, the fact that we find ancient Israel believing in these gods, if anything, doesn't disprove it. In fact, I would personally argue that it proves the Bible more, if anything. Regardless of that, however, I also think that many bring up the fact that in the Bible, it mentions multiple times the god El, right? However, we can very clearly see that El was the same God as Yahweh, and it doesn't actually take much to see this. In the Song of Moses in Exodus, it says the words, Yahuwah or Yahweh is my El, depending on how you want to pronounce Yahweh. I'm not going to go too deep into that in this video, but that might be a future video. It says that Yahweh is my El. Now, my El was a generic name for God back in the ancient West Semitic times, right? In that is sort of era and generation of time, that was the common generic name. Baal, back when that was the pantheon god, would have been considered an El because he was a god. God is in general just used in that sort of pseudonym. However, regardless of whatever you think the ancient Israelites believed in, they very clearly, at the very least the ones we record in the Bible, believed that Yahweh was a particular and special God. We know this mostly due to Bible verses that we will get into later, but in particular, El must have been considered the same as God. And we know this, again, because of a simple thing, which is that El is referred to as Yahweh in the Song of Moses and in other verses in Exodus for the most part. Now we'll get into the biblical argument, which I think is a little bit more hard to get into, and is why I saved for the second part. Now, when you read verses such as Deuteronomy or Genesis, there are two particular verses that a lot of atheists and general believers in the ancient Israel polytheistic theory that come up. For starters, I would say the most explicit one is Deuteronomy 32:8-9. In which it says, when the Most High divided the nations to their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set bounds according to the number of people of the nation of Israel. For the Lord's portion, he gave Israel. Now, regardless of what translation you use, this is particularly the King James Version, which again is not the most accurate when it comes to scholarly consensus. Such as, the New Living Translation or the NIV, all those are essentially the same when it comes to most of these are not very good translations. In particular, most scholars would recommend using the New American Standard Bible or the New Revised Version, just in general versions that would generally conceive a notion that the Bible is more accurate to the time of which it was written. But regardless of what translation you use, this is how most would translate it. Now, when the Most High divided the nations of inheritance, this means Most High means Elyon, which is a word that is often used to describe a god. For the Lord's portion, he gave Israel, or Jacob, whatever term you use. Now, it's very simple, to me at the very least, that this is not a quote saying that a god, the Most High, or El, would have given Yahweh a portion of his own land. Many of these ancient Israel was polytheistic theorists believe that the Most High is El. He's the head of the pantheon of the old Ugaritic pantheon. Now, many of them believe that the Most High, El, he divided those nations, and then he gave Yahweh Israel. But, as we remember earlier, El is just a pseudonym for Yahweh. They are not different. It is now implying that the Most High, which would imply, God himself, divided the nations of inheritance when he separated, as the verse puts it, the sons of Adam. He set bounds according to the children of Israel. Now, the children of Israel, is obviously those who live in Israel, according to the number of bounds for the people of Israel. Now, as you could see here, he's not saying that they believed in different gods. He's saying that essentially, that there were people and he allotted them the nations based on how many there were. He set the boundaries. But now many will object by saying that, again, the King James Version is not the best. Now, personally, I do indeed have a Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, in which it pronounces it the sons of God. Now, who are the sons of God? Well, the sons of God would imply any spiritual being. The sons of God in the Bible are, for the most part, translated as either Israel or even angels in the Bible, as they're often translated. I would personally take angels as a much better interpretation. However, many would say that Israel would be a better sort of understanding of it. But personally, I'm going to go with the angels one, right? So, for angels in the Bible, we understand them as the sons of God. So then we number them the same amount of which there were nations too. But Israel in particular, that's the one that belongs to Yahweh. That's the one that belongs to God. That's the one that is his land and his land alone. The Most High is God, and he's dividing the nations, two of which his sons of existence. But Israel is his, no other. Very simple. Another good thing to point out is the term Elohim is used a lot to promote the idea that there were multiple gods. Now, Elohim can be translated as gods. However, for the most part, Elohim just in general means spiritual being for a lot of cases. Angels or certain spirits that are released, such as Samuel, he's referred to as Elohim, but he's obviously not God. But he is indeed, in some sense, a spiritual being. If that makes any sense, to put it bluntly, they're ghosts or sort of angels or sort of any being that is below the throne of God could also be referred to as an Elohim, which does definitely put a little dent in the argument of a polytheistic Israel. Then the next argument that a lot of them often use is the Genesis argument. When God says, and I'll only quote one verse here, however you can read the rest, "Let us make man in our image." Now, what is our? What does that necessarily mean? Now, many will say that our clearly means that there were multiple gods. But what's strange about this verse is that surrounding verses would say otherwise. Look at Isaiah 45. In Isaiah 45, it says, "I am God, there is no other." Now, if we're using a modern scholar consensus, Isaiah would have been compiled in the 700s BC, well before Genesis would have been compiled, meaning that this would have actually come before this. Now, whether or not you agree with that chronology is up to you, but in a general consensus, Isaiah believed that God was the only God. And this is quoted many times in Isaiah. Isaiah is a very long book for the Old Testament. And "I am God and there is no other" is a very, very important verse. Now, personally, as a Christian myself, I believe that our image would imply a Trinity. Now, many theologians accept this. If you don't, that's fine. Some would suggest angels, and then others would say that it's gods. But I disagree with the gods theory because that doesn't make much sense. Why would the rest of the Bible be all in support of only one God existing but this one verse? If we were to believe that there was that they were just trying to edit the Bible and change it, which, mind you, is a very, very rough way of accepting how the Bible was written. If we are to accept that, it's a little bit rough. Regardless of that, if we were to accept that the editing theory was correct, then why would they let one verse just stay in there completely? It doesn't make any sense at all, which is why, to me at least, as a Christian, it means the Trinity. To Jews, it could mean a divine being, perhaps a member of the archangel or the divine council of the celestial beings that the Bible does indeed mention. Regardless of that, another very interesting thing, and I think this may be the most interesting, would be the Shasu of Yah, or Yahweh. It depends on who you ask, but the Shasu of Yahweh are mentioned in ancient Egyptian, just in general writing. And the Shasu are mentioned multiple times, but the most important inscription of the Shasu is, as mentioned, the Solid inscription, written around the time of Amenhotep III, around the late 1400s BC, give or take, maybe the early 1300s. They all write about different things, but one of the things that Amenhotep III writes about is the fact that there were multiple Shasu, in fact. That's the real kicker in the theory. So many people list the Shasu of Yahweh, but they don't list the others. So there was the Shasu of many, many different, possibly deities or other things as well. But there was one particular Shasu that lived in the Transjordan, which all the Shasu lived in. But there was one in particular Shasu that believed in Yahweh, that lived in the Transjordan, which is the southern Levant. Now, obviously, there is a little bit something strange about that. There's a specific people among all the other Shasu who existed, and again, very important part there, out of all of the other ones who existed, that particularly believed in Yahweh. Now, we don't have much evidence to suggest that this was 100% a god. However, Yahweh is mentioned multiple times with the Shasu. It's mentioned much later during the time of Ramesses II. And there it's mentioned again as the Shasu of Yahweh, Yahweh in the land of the Shasu, which again would imply that Yahweh was the God of Israel. Again, they lived in the southern Levant, which is the Transjordan, which in turn is Israel. Now, regardless of what your theory is on the Bible, I personally hold that there is only one God. Whether it's the Trinity, or you're a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon who believes that there is only one, no Trinity, or you're a Muslim or a Jew who, again, doesn't believe in the Trinity, I believe that there's only one God. And now these sort of, in general, objections that a lot of us believers face, I think could be answered just by simply opening up the Bible and reading it. Regardless of that, this was a very nice video to make, and I intend on making more.